Let's finish our story. Let's wrap it up, finally. Let's wrap it up. You know, when it comes to faith, it's not a matter of choosing to believe or not believe. It's a matter of choosing possibility. Possibility. So he continued walking in his journey in that desert of Lent. He was getting used to the idea that there was nothing else. He tried choosing belief, didn't work. So he had only one option left: unbelief. No God, no rain, no manna. Now, not wanting his family to know and worry about him, even though they could tell something was off, he pretended the best he could that everything was fine. Continued helping out in youth group on the weekends, continued going to Mass once in a while. So then as the weeks passed by of that Lent, the dreaded Holy Week finally arrived. It was dreaded because he had decided not to go to any of the Holy Week services. It would make him feel strange to be in those high celebrations, which in the past had meant so much to him. He did not want to feel that emptiness inside the church, so he decided he was not going to go. Holy Thursday arrived. He's at work and he gets a call from his sister. She was going to work late and was not able to get there in time. She was the youth minister to help organize the teens for ushering and collection, so she asked if I could be there for her. I wasn't planning on going, and I had the good excuse that I was also going to work late, but I said, sure. I chose yes, primarily as an act of community service. So the evening came at that Holy Thursday, and he arrived in the church. He gathered the teens, got them organized into groups, and then he proceeds to go and sit down at his usual pew, that usual spot, that same place that he had sat months earlier during that Christmas Eve Mass, that same place where he was asking for that candle to flicker. And being there and looking at that candle, it took him back to that moment, and again he experienced that emptiness, reminding him he didn't want to be there. So the Mass continues. After the homily, there are 12 stools that are brought up on top by the altar. Then 12 people proceed to come up and sit down on those stools. The washing of the feet, something he had seen every year ever since he could remember. But for some reason, this time, his eyes were fixed on the priest, Father Philip Bloom. He sat in his presider chair, just waiting for everyone to get seated, for them to take off their shoes. And there was something about that priest, something about his semblance, something about his posture, his face, that just somehow spoke of fulfillment. Couldn't explain what it was, but there was something about him that was really attractive. So once everybody was situated, everyone was ready, Father stood, he took off his chasuble, which is this outer garment that priests wear, carefully places it on his chair, and joins the end of the line. He is given a pitcher of water, proceeds to kneel down. Now, from where he was sitting, he could see everything. He was right in the middle of the action, and every little move seemed so attractive. As he sees the water begins to pour down out of that pitcher, something else came pouring down over him. Now, what happened next, he has been trying to find the appropriate words to describe, but all of them seem inadequate. In an instant, he feels completely surrounded by this overwhelming presence. It was a presence that was around him, it was next to him, it was in front of him, behind him, it was in him. It was a presence that felt that was near, but also far at the same time. It was something that was so familiar, yet it seemed so foreign. It was a presence that he can only describe as being surrounded by fire, but it didn't hurt. It was somehow surrounded by the essence of love. If love had a gas form, that was surrounding him. And he was inhaling it, and it was overpowering. the essence of pure love. Now that feeling, that awareness that he felt at that instant, it was irresistible. And at an instant, like a turning on of a switch, all of the doubt, all of the sadness, all of the numbness, that lack of meaning and depression that he had felt throughout those 40 days, they completely dissipated. And they were transformed into this unexplainable joy, this certainty, this inner certainty, inner assurance of faith. And the only thought that would come to his mind is, God is real. Jesus is here. I am loved. Over and over again, this phrase came to his mind. God is real. Jesus is here. I am loved. And not only did he feel loved, but he felt this urge, this need to be the one up there in place of that priest washing the feet of the people. And this was a thought that not only surprised him, for he never thought about being a priest in the past, but the thought of it, imagining himself doing that, it filled him with that which he was seeking, meaning, purpose. Now that whole experience was overwhelming in the best of ways. And just as he thought things couldn't get any better, he was already in the clouds by that moment. Mass continues. The moment of consecration comes. Father holds the bread, says, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body," holds up the Eucharist, and once again, like water pouring out of a pitcher, he feels overwhelmed by the sense of presence all around him, in front of him, behind him, in him. And not only that, but that host which Father was holding up, it was a magnet. It felt like a literal magnet. It wasn't an emotional attraction, it was a physical attraction. To the point where he had to hold on to the pews to stop himself from running up to the altar, pushing poor Father aside, and be the one holding that Eucharist. It was overwhelming. Now, he was being consumed by this presence. He was being consumed by what he knew was the presence of Jesus in the people around him, in the Eucharist. And he wanted nothing more but to be united with him. It was weird. He had this inner desire, this inner need to be inside of that host. And then if things wouldn't get any better, he begins to look around, see if anyone else is experiencing the same thing. And he is able to somehow sense that people needed the same thing. Whether they were aware of it, whether they were feeling it the same way that he was or not, they were in need of that same thing. And there was no doubt in his mind by that point that the reason for his existence was to experience that moment of grace that very night. That the purpose of his life, his mission, was to help facilitate the space so that people can come to that same experience of God. The rain came. Manna appeared in that desert. That candle, it was lit. It was lit. He goes home that night, and all he can think of is the experience. I need to be a priest. And he is filled with this gratitude. He was glad that he made a choice that morning. The choice to be there. Because that choice led him to discover fire. Discover fire. So over the past 4 weeks, it would have been 5, but last week we had the Assumption, so we got a little break. Over the past 4 weeks, we've been going over John 6, the gospel, the discourse on the bread of life. And I took it as an opportunity to share with you some of my personal testimony for 3 reasons. Number 1, I'm still fairly new here, so I'm trying to find ways for you to get to know me slowly. I thought this was a great opportunity to share with you at least that part of my conversion story. Second, I also wanted to get a gauge of your homily length tolerance level. Done good so far. But third, it's important for me to be able to speak about the struggles with faith in a personal level. Because I want you to be assured that I am struggling with you with the same things. that we are in the struggle together. So, which is why we've been looking at the difficulties with faith throughout this last 4 weeks. For example, we saw how one of the difficulties comes when we look for signs of God in our lives. We ask for them, but nothing happens. When we try to work for God's favor, but then we fall short, and so are tempted to think that, well, God just is not listening or doesn't care about me. And then also, sometimes when those crises of faith can lead us to indifference, to numbness, to depression. So in all of these struggles that we've been talking about, one thing keeps coming up. One thing keeps coming to the surface. The importance of honesty. And we've been seeing how no matter what the struggle is in our lives, in faith, what God cares about the most is our honesty. How honest we are able to be about it. That's where we left off 2 weeks ago. So today we see how this honesty, this theme of honesty, has now brought us to something else. And in honesty, we are now confronted with the need to make a choice. But when it comes to faith, people often think of choices as just two things. You either believe or you don't believe. You either choose one religion or you choose another one. You either choose what's right or you choose what's wrong. But that is not how the approach of faith should be. And there are problems when we think of faith in this way. We'll see why. So God offers us a third choice. The choice of possibility. What do I mean by that? The choice of possibility. Well, let's explore the people in the first reading and the gospel to see their attitude, which is always universal. Their attitude is always our attitude as well. And God is correcting certain things. So let's see. In that first reading, we hear about Joshua. And Joshua gathers the people of Israel because they're trying to figure something out. They're trying to figure out their faith. What was the issue? They had gone through the desert. They were delivered from Egypt. They went through the desert. They were now living in the promised land, and they were facing this issue. What God do we serve? Remember, they thought that gods were regional, so there was a bunch of different ones. So they only had two choices, at least that's what they thought. We either choose to serve the God of our ancestors that they worshipped before they were enslaved in Egypt. We go back to that. Or, since we're in a new area, in the territory of a new God, then we serve and worship this new God. Which one? What's the choice? Those are the only two options. So, what God is doing here is presenting them with a third choice. That is what Joshua comes and tells them. Joshua is saying, well, how about you choose the God who freed you from Egypt, the God who fed you in the desert, the God who has now given you this land to live in. Now, at first, when they heard this, it was very difficult for them to accept because this God that had been presented to them was not what they expected. It was very unlike the gods that they were familiar with. This God didn't care about territory. He would jump from one to another. That was unusual. This God was feeding them. That was unusual. Manna in the desert. So we take that and we see how Joshua is inviting them towards that third choice, the possibility that maybe they weren't supposed to choose either the God of their ancestors or the God of this new territory. Maybe they were to accept the God, the I am, even though they didn't quite understand who this God was. And they take it, they make a choice. They didn't quite understand it, but they took it. So then we look now at the disciples. With this in mind, let's look at the disciples and how they encountered this very same dilemma. So Jesus is offering the disciples this new teachings, this new ways of looking and experiencing God, but they were things that were difficult to accept. And it filled them with doubt. That's not the problem, remember. So the two things that were difficult for them to accept was Jesus' self-identification as the Son of Man and his insistence to eat of his flesh. Those two things were very troubling. They were troubling statements because that is not how God is supposed to be. God was not supposed to be physically present to them in human form. God was not supposed to be feeding them and sacrificing himself for them. Instead, They were the ones who were supposed to offer sacrifice for the gods. They were the ones who were supposed to offer blood to feed the needs of the gods. It was strange. It was completely opposite of what their notion of God was. So it's very understandable that yes, there are doubts that came with the words that Jesus was telling them. Because for them, they thought they only had two choices. They either followed the God of their ancestors, followed the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, the God of Abraham, and remained faithful, or they are unfaithful and they choose what they thought was a new God, the God that Jesus was presenting them. Both were incorrect. So Jesus, to try to help them, he gives them this third option. Jesus welcomes their doubt, but instead of giving them this long explanation of what he means, he simply reiterates the same thing. And in doing this, in not offering an explanation, Jesus is inviting them towards this third choice. The choice of giving Jesus the benefit of the doubt that if they choose to stay, even though things might not make sense right now, eventually they will. You see, he wants for them to stay close to him, even in their doubt, even with their doubt, so that offering more than just an explanation, he could offer them an experience, so that they can come to experience what he meant. Why? Because to those who believe, no explanation is necessary. To those who don't believe, no explanation is possible. So that's the third choice that Jesus is giving. He's giving them a chance to show them something new, a chance to experience something, a chance to experience Christ. Now, when presented with this choice, because some of them couldn't think of this third option, they chose to leave. They couldn't be unfaithful to the God of Abraham. They chose to leave. They didn't take the chance. The 12, though, they decided to take a chance. Where else are we going to go? They stayed. Still didn't make sense, but they stayed. They chose to stay. This is both a challenge and the model for our own faith lives. Why? Because we all struggle with different aspects of our faith. We do. Whether it's belief, whether it's believing in the real presence, a certain church teaching, whether it's moral. Some people struggle with, for example, Pope Francis and what he says and what he's doing. Others struggle with particular moral teachings. Others struggle with things like particular sins or vices. And the problem is not the struggle. We should never feel bad about struggling with something or doubting something. That's not the issue. The problem comes when we think we have no choice except one or the other, right or wrong. God, believe. No God, no believe. So the invitation that God gives us is to choose this third choice, meaning to stay close to Jesus, even when it doesn't make sense, because that is the only way that we give God a chance to do something with our doubt, to do something with the struggle, to do something with our difficulty. Otherwise, we walk away or we become unfaithful. Now, I say this with confidence, not because I read it in a book, but because it was part of my powerful experience with Jesus that night, where my lack of belief was completely transformed into this inner certainty, into this desire to be consumed by the fire of that Eucharist. And all I had to do was simply show up. Even in my doubt, all I had to do was just say, yes, I'll be there. There is no explanation to what happened that Holy Thursday. I'm still looking for it. There is none, except that I just had an encounter with a living person. I had an encounter with Christ. And the desire that that encounter has produced is the reason that I am here with you today. And that is the desire that makes me hopeful and pushes me to want to facilitate a space so that you may also have that encounter. I don't know how else to say it, but somehow, somewhere, in some way, candles flicker, Rains come, manna appears in the desert. So I guess in that sense, our story doesn't wrap up. Our story doesn't end. Our story continues, but this time together.